June and Edgar Martin Memorial Lecture, the main event of the Upton Forum, this year on the topic of entrepreneurship and the wealth and well-being of nations. My name is Laura Grube. I'm an associate professor of economics here at Beloit College, and I also have the honor of holding the Nice chair in economics. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. I do want to start my remarks by thanking everyone who was a part of this week's events. I will begin with, of course, our speakers, those being Oakley Ryan, today Daniel Bennett, Siri Turgison, and Stephanie Hafley. Thank you, of course, to all of the donors, including, but certainly not limited to, June and Edgar Martin, the Nice Family Foundation, Bob and Jerry Virgil, and Bill and Allison Fitzgerald for making this event possible and for your continued support of what we do in liberal education. Thank you to Jennifer Kodal for putting together another spectacular forum. You certainly set a high standard, as President Boynton mentioned just before dinner, and we are so grateful for the countless hours you put in to make sure that every detail is considered. So maybe we can pause and give Jennifer a round of applause. Thank you to the students in senior seminar for engaging in our topic this year on entrepreneurship and for welcoming all of the invited speakers this week. Finally, thank you to facilities, sound and AV, and food service staff who made sure that the events went smoothly this week. This year marks the 16th year of the Upton Forum at Beloit College. The forum is named in honor of Miller Upton, who was the 6th president of Beloit College. Miller Upton was an advocate for the ideals of the liberal society. Importantly, Upton believed that the liberal arts college is the ideal place to engage the great questions and set the standard for civil discourse in an open society. As I was planning this forum last spring, we were celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Center for Entrepreneurship in Liberal Education at Beloit, also known as CELEB. CELEB has been promoting entrepreneurship at Beloit College through courses and, importantly, co-curricular experiences like the student-run art gallery or the TV and media lab and the makerspace. Emeritus Professor of Economics and founder of CELEB, Jerry Gustafson, understood that entrepreneurship involves the development of self-agency. By the way, Jerry is also an alumnus of Beloit College and was a student of President Miller Upton. Writing on entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship education, Jerry explains, quote, "A fulfilling life requires a measure of subject mastery, and intellectual presence, and critical thinking. But it also requires that a person is prepared to act on their beliefs and ideas. They must live in the expectation that thought will lead to action, and they need skills of effective action," end quote. We are honored to have Professor David Audretsch, the leading scholar in entrepreneurship and innovation, with us tonight as the 2024 Miller Upton Scholar. In addition to his research on entrepreneurship and innovation, Professor Audretsch has written on how communities engage in effective action to undertake the challenges that they face in a dynamic economy. Professor Audretsch is the Distinguished Professor and Ameritech Chair of Economic Development at Indiana University, where he also serves as the Director for the Institute for Development Strategies. He is an Honorary Professor of Industrial Economics and Entrepreneurship at the WHU-Otto Beisheim School of Management in Germany, and a part-time Professor of Entrepreneurship at the University of Klagenfurt in Austria. Professor Audretsch's research has investigated how R&D and knowledge spillovers generate innovation and increase productivity, the role of knowledge spillovers in economic clusters, how universities and colleges contribute to innovation, the institutional environment that supports entrepreneurship in the US and internationally with a focus on countries like Germany, and many, many other topics. Professor Audretsch has authored and co-authored over 150 articles, books, and book chapters. These works have been cited over 100,000 times in the literature on business and management. I think there was discussion today of another milestone, 140,000 times. Professor Audretsch has also supported the field by founding and serving as the editor of the journal Small Business Economics. In addition to his scholarship, Professor Audretsch has consulted with numerous international organizations, including the World Bank, OECD, European Union, and the United Nations, as well as several private companies. Without further delay, please join me in welcoming Professor David Audretsch.
Thanks very much, Laura. Thanks to you, thanks to the entire team and community. You've mentioned a fair number of them, so I don't have to, for the very kind invitation to come here, join you, be part of this very special week. And I have to say, you know, we've been here, I guess 3 days is our third day here. You know, during this time, we've interacted with students, gone to a couple classes, seminars, different events with students, with faculty, colleagues, and I feel so touched and inspired by the energy, by the commitment to intellectual inquiry, but also by the, I think, the commitment to honest, forthright, and tolerable exchange. Being able to actually talk with each other, talk to different people freely and openly and unafraid. Anyway, it's very impressive. And then there's the weather. You know, I got my PhD up the road in medicine, and I guess times I'd forgotten, you know, how cold and dark a November night can be here in Wisconsin. And, you know, it reminds me of another very cold, dark November night 35 years ago in a week. And we were in Berlin. And I was so cold when I got home. I remember I took refuge in the bathtub. I didn't get warm. And while I was doing that, my wife, Joanne, turned on the radio and comes in and says, "The Berlin Wall fell. It's open. They're coming over." And I thought, oh, fake news. And so, yeah, we rushed down there. And sure enough, the Berlin Wall was open. And you could see it. You could feel it. It was, history was happening. It was changing. And in the coming days and weeks and months was this exuberance because the Cold War was gone. It was over. There was a best-selling book at that time, maybe a year later. Francis Ford Fukuyama, a well-known political scientist. Actually, George Mason at that time, and then went on to Johns Hopkins and Stanford, but he wrote this famous world-selling book called The End of History. That was the way he characterized that moment, this great tension between freedom, democracy, individualism had triumphed over totalitarianism. And with this came, that meant society no longer had to invest in this fight in very real terms. I mean, you have to be in Berlin to see the amount of resources that went into military and protection and safety. In fact, what I recall, I went to a college, not unlike this, a liberal arts college, Drew University, a little bit warmer in New Jersey. And it seems to me it was like the first day of my introductory economics class, and we learned the production possibility frontier. I suppose you modern people don't teach that anymore. But you know what I remember, there was like a curve here, and there was like guns on one axis and butter on the other axis. And so society had to allocate resources. Well, you know what the end of history meant? Put it all into butter. Maybe the other axis should be like anti-cholesterol medication or something. But yeah, it was, and so, yeah, after that, happy days were here, and there was a lot of talk about the peace dividend. You free up those resources, a lot of good things can happen. Only it didn't. In Detroit, fewer and fewer cars were sold. I mean, people kept driving cars, but not as much as from Detroit. In steel, less and less tonnage of steel was sold. I mean, steel was consumed more than ever for buildings, but it wasn't produced in Pittsburgh or the United States. Motor vehicles, right down the road in Janesville, the torrent of vehicles that had been coming off the assembly line in the postal area was getting reduced to a trickle. Because along with this end of history also came something else. Now, we all know what that is. It's like we've seen the movie, right? You know, a lot of people put this label on, oh, we'll call it globalization. And that meant, for the first time in I remember it in my life, when suddenly companies started to outsource offshore different places around the world. It was possible to do business in Eastern Europe and Central Europe. China was there. The whole world opens up. But this caused, yes, it was intoxicating, but it came with consequences, which is what used to work for prosperity. That formula didn't work as well. And it wasn't just here in this country, it was pretty much all over the developed world. So after about a decade of stagnation, I mean, growth just stopped, went negative to some degree. Unemployment in Sweden, unemployment ratcheted up and up and up. A country that had unemployment got into double digits. After about a decade of this, they decided, well, we better do something. So they called up a small group of us to go to Stockholm and make suggestions of what to do. And, you know, I was younger then, maybe a little bit more, I'm not going to say cocky, but, you know, I knew the answer. So I marched into Stockholm, and when my time came, I got up, and because I'd become a disciple of, then it was the new thinking in macroeconomic growth theory. They call it the endogenous growth theory. And its chief architect, wonderful guy, wonderful mind and thinker, Paul Romer, in fact, he just won the Nobel Prize the other year for this idea. You know, he didn't have to go far. He looked out of his window at the University of California in Berkeley, and he saw, you know, unlike, say, here in the Midwest, which was suffering and stagnating, or lots of Europe, what he saw was prosperity. Lots of, I mean, he saw Intel, and he saw, you know, all these tech companies. And so what he started to realize is that, you know, what he didn't see was factories. And he realized, yeah, the formula had changed. What matters is innovation. And California, the Bay Area, was, you know, awash in innovation. It was doing great. So what he made clear is that innovation matters. Now, we knew that in economics, and I would say the most influential thinker of the generation before me, Robert Solow, an economist at MIT, he'd won the Nobel Prize for telling us, why is it that some places do better than other places? And what he found is that, yeah, innovation matters a lot, but he couldn't tell us how to get us at all. In a famous passage, he said, innovation falls he called it actually, I'm translating in modern words, I guess what they call it is technical change. So it's an innovation. Technical change falls like manna from heaven. Now, those of you who've kind of in art history or visited Europe, you know from various museums and churches, oh, it's kind of biblical depictions. Manna was a kind of a food that fell from heaven to those who were graced. And so he's basically saying, you know, it's luck. It's like manna from heaven. And it's a little bit troublesome when you start thinking about, well, what are the policy prescriptions and implications? I mean, you know, if you're a biblical scholar, is it prayer? Is that what it is? It seems, could the queen, you know, the queen of the social sciences, economics, the queen discipline, is that what it's saying? You know, we can't really influence it, so let's either, you know, resort to prayer, religion. Well, probably more likely people would say, nah, you know, it's something in the sand. It's in the sand. Maybe it's magic in the sand. Well, Romer looks out of his window and says, no, it's not that. What he sees, doesn't see factories, but he sees a lot of innovative companies, and he sees what do they need? They need ideas. So just on his own campus, University of California, Berkeley, all kinds of research, new ideas being generated in chemistry and physics and engineering. Then he kind of looks across the bay there, Stanford University, and right into San Francisco is the University of California, San Francisco. Most of us go, they're great medical university, and it's all of this research is generating ideas, and also a lot of talent in the business. We call it human capital. People can think with ideas, implement those ideas. Then, of course, there's a lot of private companies like Intel doing big-time research and development that's generating ideas. Even government research facilities like the Ames research facility in Palo Alto that's crucial for the aerospace industry. So what he saw is, this is not in the sand, or it's not some kind of biblical kind of luck. It's actually the result of blood, sweat, and tears. It's investment in ideas and knowledge and research and development. So I read all this, and I marched into Stockholm, and I said, well, I know what Sweden needs to do. It needs to invest in knowledge. It needs more research and development. It needs to put more money into the universities. It needs more patents. I think I even said, if you can imagine the audacity of somebody from this side of the Atlantic going over there and telling Europeans, you need to invest more in culture, because culture will generate creativity, maybe a little creativity will help. And I remember our host that day, the Minister of Economics, very kind gentleman, said, well, we're sure the professor must be right, but nobody will ever believe him, because by any measure we have, Sweden's already number 1 or 2 in the world in terms of research in universities, R&D. Well, you know, it's a small country, so you have to divide by GDP or something. Number of patents, maybe patents per firm, patents per population. If you look at the education levels, I mean, they're just the tops in the world based on, what was it, the Beloit measure, that famous Italian, Beloit measures. Yeah, that was the first time I ever heard of the Swedish paradox. What the paradox was, is they seemed to be doing everything right, getting this coveted, what you need for innovation, but it wasn't happening. And actually, Paul Romer, had he looked just a little bit more closely, he would have seen the same thing in the Bay Area of California. If he put his spyglass maybe down to Palo Alto and looked inside the laboratory of Xerox PARC, that's where they did Xerox was the great copy machine corporation. I mean, they just dominated the industry. It was my whole life till I was probably at the student stage, and they had 90-95% of the copy machines. And they did their R&D facility in Palo Alto. And if he could have looked in, he would have seen, oh wow, in that research facility, the scientists and engineers, I mean, they paid a lot of money to these people. And they came up with, they did their job, came up with a new idea, an invention, which, and you can look it up. I mean, you can type it in your Google browser right now and look up convention at Xerox Park and type in first computer. They come up with the first personal computer. And you can see it. It looks kind of like what we all have. I mean, it's, you know, it's dated. It looks kind of old and like it's from the Flintstones or something. But it's still a computer. It's even got a mouse and a screen. They came up with it. So the accounts say, yeah, the team that did this cost a lot of money in terms of, you know, paying very talented scientists and engineers to come up with this. And so they go to their boss and say, hey, look what we've got. This is incredible. Because up to that point, they've only been mainframe computers. And the boss's boss say, huh? We make copy machines. What are we going to do with this? Stop wasting our money, get back to work. So they, you know, good employees, they stop wasting their money, get back to work, and the thing's just sitting there. And that's actually the same thing that was happening in Sweden, right? That there were a lot of ideas coming from the research and development. But it was hard for the organizations to see, you know, what are the good ideas, what aren't the good ideas. The difference between, you know, Silicon Valley or Northern California, Bay Area at that point, was, it wasn't just one young man or two young men, but Steve Jobs was there. And he got wind of this from some friends, went to Xerox. I mean, they were trying to keep it a secret. I visualized it in my mind. It was basically in the trash bin. He pulls it out and says, wait a minute, I know a lot of hackers, young people. They're all trying to create this. I can sell it to them. And then he kind of could envision, people don't have to kind of passively let the computations be done on mainframe computers. You get the results next Wednesday. They can, you know, he had this vision for what we all have. And so the difference was the Bay Area had entrepreneurs like Jobs who could actually take that knowledge from the organization, the firm that was created, but they couldn't pull the trigger. They couldn't pull the trigger because it's hard to figure out what's a good idea, what's not a good idea. They were focused on something else anyway. Well, Jobs did the job. He took it, went out, started Apple, and the rest is history. And a lot of people say, well, what was wrong with, you know, Xerox, these copy machines anyway? But it's not just them. I mean, if you, I don't know if you know, you young people, students even, have heard of the film about Zuckerberg and how he started Facebook. It used to be Facebook, right? But my favorite part of the movie is when the twins, you know, they kind of start to see the door, and you know, it's a bunch of them kind of working, they're these twins, and you know what happens? You know, everybody thinks it's their idea, right? And Zuckerberg, he thinks it's his. So the twins, they get upset, and they go to the authority figure. They go to the president of the university, president of Harvard. That gets my attention because the president is Larry Summers, and I've been trained in my own graduate training up the road there at Madison. Well, the best mind in economics of my generation, not just in economics, but probably in the country, in the world, in the universe, was Larry Summers. So there these twins go to the best mind in the universe, Larry Summers, and they say, President Summers, Mark stole our idea. And if anybody recall what President Summers replies, he says, boys, this is Harvard, get another one. You know, even he couldn't see, you know, this is a once-in-a-generational, multi-generational idea. It's hard to say, you know, it's hard to, what does that famous country music song say? You got no one to hold them, no one to throw them. Well, Kenny Rogers is surely right, but it still doesn't tell you how to know it. So anyway, yeah, I mean, people started to realize, oh, it's not enough to have the knowledge. You gotta get the entrepreneurs to actually take that idea and get it out there. It won't just it won't just spill over on its own. I mean, that was the thing about the Romer Hittite. He said, well, knowledge. He didn't say this, but I guess if you come up with the idea now, we'd have said, oh, knowledge is like COVID. You know, it is, you know, somebody has COVID. You get an event like this, it's a super spreader, it spreads. And that's what ideas do, they spread, except one's kind of negative and the other's really positive. So you get a lot of new inventions and ideas and innovations from ideas, because a lot of people can access it. Whereas COVID, of course, is the opposite. Plus, like COVID, it tends to cluster. You know, Remember, we had these clusters of COVID, and well, we see that with the innovations as well. But what, and I suppose the reason why, I never asked him, but I suppose the reason why Romer didn't really hit on the importance of entrepreneurship is because it was every place there. It was just obvious. So you're going to have to be not in Silicon Valley to realize this is not something you can just take for granted. And so that raises the question then, well, how can a place get it if it doesn't have it? And that answer was easy, at least according to a Silicon Valley guy, Gordon Moore. He was one of the founders of Intel. And he said, oh, it's simple. You combine liberal arts of technology, entrepreneurs, capital, and sunshine, and one university, stir vigorously. So this is really what the predecessor to what now is, it's kind of a hot thing for cities and states and regions, for places. Let's create an entrepreneurial ecosystem. All that means is the ecosystem is really a resource provider. Give the entrepreneur what they need. And what do they need? It's probably technology, capital. I'm not sure about the sunshine, but the university helps a lot, right? Because what did we hear? Oakley say 2 days ago, right? And talking about Janesville. She goes, we got it all in Janesville. We need a university. Now, I'm not saying that's the answer, but it's interesting that there's more. But actually, so places did this, and it worked. But there's two problems. They complicate it. And the first, as I say, Mark Zuckerberg, right? Remember what Mark does in the movie, or if you just know his life, what he does after he's kind of gets the idea and then starts Facebook. He leaves. He gets the idea in his dorm. So this, in a way, is what you needed to launch, to generate, to get this very valuable idea, but it wasn't enough to keep him. There was a reason why he went west to Silicon Valley, and it's in the movie, and I won't even say it, but the point is, it's one thing to create it, it's another thing to keep it. And then on the right, we've got Mark Anderson, who founded Mozilla, it was, I think, in Champaign-Urbana, Mosaic. He was a student who founded it in the dorms at University of Illinois, Champaign-Urbana. And, he got the company going. And then what did he do? He took off and he went west for California. So, yeah, there was a great, they had the university, they had enough to start the entrepreneurship, but not enough. So right there, you can have a place for entrepreneurship, but I mean, my whole career, I don't want to say all we hear is belly aching from down there at Champaign-Urbana. They've got great knowledge, all this knowledge, it's really crucial, but they have a hard time, they create the entrepreneurs, but the entrepreneurs leave. And actually, it's not that uncommon. Well, a little while back before COVID, I think it was maybe about 7-8 years ago, I was at an event in Berlin. Yeah, the same Berlin, because what happened in Berlin is, after the wall fell and then they had this great peace dividend, well, Berlin's, strange enough, its strategy had been for decades and decades. It was a victim. I mean, the 1930s, it was a victim of National Socialism. Hitler and his lot, the National Socialists, came in, took the city over, and that's really a victim, right? Then there was the war, and by the end, about 90% of the city had been bombed out and destroyed. That's really a victim. Then things got, I guess, better for the west part of the city, right? The Western allies, the Brits, the French, the Americans occupied it, but they're occupied by foreign powers. Maybe the east side got so lucky, occupied by the Soviet Union. It was a victim. Kennedy went there in 1962, about this time actually, the year went there and said famously, Ich bin ein Berliner, at the Rathaus Schöneberg, thousands and thousands, you see photos, thousands and thousands of people out there. And what he was saying, I am a Berliner. And by the end, look, I'm with you, we're going to support you, we're not going to let you fall and become like, the East Part and become taken by the Soviets. And that meant resources are flowing into that city. When I got the job offer to go there, my first job was at a liberal arts college, actually, in Middlebury, in Vermont. And I'd been there a couple of years, and then I got this opportunity to go to Berlin to a research center, a think tank. And I thought, yeah, sure, they want me for my brain, who wouldn't, right? And, I went there, they didn't really care so much what we did. And it's only years later I started to look back and think, no, basically, the Federal Republic of Germany, the West Germans, their best city, their star city, was occupied by foreign powers. They were dependent on these foreign powers, the Americans, the French, and the Brits, to hang on to that city. And I don't know about you, would you want to really rely on these powers to kind of protect it forever? They're kind of fickle sometimes. So they figured, okay, we'll probably put in 30,000 potential hostages. They didn't want me for my brain at all. They wanted me for my body, the only time in my life. So Berlin was but the problem was after the wall fell, strangely enough, that was the strategy of the city. I'm not saying it was good or bad, but yeah, people were willing to. I think my institute, the Institute of International Management, I had no research record. Why would they want me for my research? But they were funded by the Ford Foundation. Somehow the State Department seemed to be involved, and then the Federal Republic of Germany. They were trying to draw in people from France and England and the U.S. and Canada and so on. So the city really fell into disarray after the wall fell. Unemployment ratchets up to 20%. Businesses are flowing, and they realized they got to do something about this. And they realized, well, they've got great universities, great think tanks, because that's what the investments have been. They needed entrepreneurship, and they start going for it. They start trying to make the city attractive, and they create really a very vibrant, successful entrepreneurial ecosystem. And so at this kind of event where we're celebrating the entrepreneurial ecosystem of the place, Berlin, I was particularly interested in this keynote speaker, Caitlin Winter, because she was the daughter of my college roommate at Drew University. Freshman year, I remember Carl was my roommate, and then, graduated and ended up getting married, and Caitlin was his firstborn. And I remember her kind of drawing a lot of crayons and crayon drawings and stuff. Well, she ended up going to a liberal arts college and majoring in art. And the next thing I knew, so now she met two dudes from Berlin, and they started like they had a startup in Berlin, they had an app. And basically the app would be, God has explained this, if you like something like this event, you type into your app, I guess. Amen, so it's called Amen Berlin. If you didn't like it, you type in hell no. And I asked her, because every time I go to Berlin, being a kind of father's best friend in college, I take her out for dinner. So I asked, how are you going to make money on this? This seems like fun, but how are you going to make money? And she rolled her eyes and looked at me with that look that, people like you, the students, kind of look at people like me, and said, it's obvious. First, we're going to create a big splash, and one of the other founders was a journalist, had been a journalist, so he knew how to get it out there, a splash, and then we're going to scale it up, and then we're going to monetize. And I said, and I'm on the plane going home thinking, how are you going to monetize it? But anyway, so in their keynote speech, she goes, she could only do this startup in Berlin. She said, she'd go out, she had a flat right on the Spree downtown, and she said there were entrepreneurs all over. She'd go into the cafes and talk to people. They're all in the scene, the industry, and they got ideas. And there's a photo of, I guess, her venture capitalist, which is, if you will recognize, kind of fuzzy, but it's Ashton Kutcher. And, they got investment from him. So they're like living the dream. And she would say it was only in Berlin that she could have done this, and I was really fired up. Until the next keynote speaker, oh yeah, there it is. So Berlin had created this ecosystem. The next keynote speaker, Jack Hardy, and I was interested in him too, because the fall of '72, when I started college at Drew, these liberal arts colleges are special. And they're great at creating communities like this. At counting correctly and making out so good. So he admitted too many freshmen. So we were in a double, but there were three of us. So there was Carl and also Jack. And so they kind of put in a cot as well. And Jack kind of ended up getting out to Silicon Valley. He starts the East Silicon. He would say they made boutique semiconductors, whatever that is. But Jack gets up there and he says, all this talk about the place and everything he does, it's the entrepreneur. He says the real hero here is Caitlin. Then he says, then he starts talking about how great it is, because his mandate was to talk about why he loves Silicon Valley. So he talks about, the venture capital, and he talks about the universities and all the knowledge and ideas coming out. He talks about the talent, and and we're all eating up, because this is like comfort food to people who study entrepreneurship. It's, this is Silicon Valley. It's like, and then halfway through he goes, now let me tell you why I'm going to leave it. He says, they won't let me do what I want. I want to knock down a wall. No, they can't do that. I want to hire certain people. They need to, I'm willing to do that. He goes, I'm going to Vietnam. That's where they let me do it. And there's like silence, because nobody leaves Silicon Valley, let alone Silicon Valley for Vietnam. But Jack's point is not. The entrepreneur comes first. They do what they do to attain their dreams. And, that's, in fact, Caitlin ended up leaving too. Well, so that's one problem or one challenge to the ecosystem. You can create them, but can you keep them? The other challenge is not, and this will surprise you a week after our election, right? Not everybody agrees on the same thing. There is this divisiveness about what to do, whether it's in a country or in a place, a city, a region. And one thing there wasn't any disagreement about is that we had a problem in the late 60s. We in particular in place cities like Los Angeles. The American dream from all those automobiles was now choking people in LA. In fact, in all the cities in the country, this was a real problem. Here's, I downloaded this with images, but it was a daily thing, not just in LA, probably the most prominent in that. We had a problem. But you know what? All that R&D that General Motors ruled the earth at this point. It was by far the largest company in the country, but on the planet. It just towered over the second largest company, Exxon, and then came Ford. So you had two of the three largest companies are just pouring in millions of dollars to invent and innovate in the auto industry. And it was clear, here was a problem, people had a need, which was to alleviate this pollution. And they actually came up with a solution that we now call the catalytic converter, and that was an invention. The only problem was, it hit this filter. We call it the knowledge filter. It hit the same wall, same thing that happened down in Xerox PARC, same thing that happened in Sweden. Here's a good idea. They had this invention, but they didn't want to do it. Why didn't they want to do it? This is just from public testimony. I guess the speaker for General Motors, Ernie Starkman, says they didn't want to do it because it would be bad for them. He says if GM is forced to introduce catalytic converter systems across the board on 1975 models, it's conceivable the complete stoppage of the entire production could occur, with the obvious tremendous loss to the company, shareholders, employees, suppliers, and communities. Disaster. You don't want that. Somebody else says, well, and if we don't do it, it's not that bad anyway. This is somebody from the Auto Manufacturers Association. He says, the effects of ozone are not that serious. What we're talking about is a temporary loss in lung function of 20, 30%. It's not really, I mean, you have 2 lungs. But you know, what we know in entrepreneurship, when there's a good idea, and if they don't want to do it in the legacy company that creates it, or an entrepreneur, that's exactly what happened. Actually, one of the inventors of the idea, Eugene you know, the auto companies don't want to do it. He starts his own company, Oxy Catalyst. And that's exactly, you know, Jobs started Apple. This guy starts Oxy Catalyst, get the thing going. The problem is, it comes out a decade later, you know, in Detroit, the auto companies don't like it. They don't want this company, this entrepreneur, doing something that they perceive will be detrimental to what they want. So they get pretty heavy. They go to the banks and say, if you loan Udry in his company, what's it called, Oxy Catalyst, if you loan him money, you can do that, but you'll never do business with the auto industry or any of its suppliers, which is this web, right, and it just expands across the Midwest. And ever again, you'll basically be blackballed. They go to the employees and say, yeah, you can work for this person, but don't ever ask anybody in our industry for a job or any of our suppliers. They go to his suppliers and say, if you supply to him, you can forget it. They basically go after him. Then, actually, it's not clear, but there was an attempt of murder. He was a murder attempt on his life. Somebody else ended up getting killed. And this all comes out in a court case. Now, the point is that at the place, it's not clear everybody's interest is the same thing for this entrepreneurship. That when there's a vested interest, this power, it can impede, subvert, block entrepreneurship is this case. And it really isn't surprising from what we know in the world of ideas. A great scholar, Stephen Klepper at Carnegie Mellon, he devoted really most of his career to tracking the evolution of entrepreneurs over their life cycle, and then industries over their life cycle. So for example, he would go to an industry like autos, and in the early years, it's kind of funny when you read, he gets these data, and what he sees is there's lots and lots of different types of autos. I mean, there's autos with smokestacks and people putting wood in, there's autos with kind of kites or, you know, kind of trying to catch the wind, and there's some that flaps and all kinds of crazy things. And then what he does is he says, yeah, there's a kind of predictable pattern on the vertical. This is just downward from one of his papers, but there's the number of firms in the industry. And it kind of goes up and up and up. And at some point, the technology of kind of model catches in. Well, for autos, we know what that is. Well, we still have like 4 wheels, internal combustion engine. And at this point, all of the smokestacks and the wings and the kites, they all just disappear, fall off. And what do you end up with? Just a few industries, in a few companies in the industry. And it's really true in the auto industry. I mean, Indiana was all kinds of auto companies in Indianapolis. They make great restaurants, boutiques, and so on. These buildings do. They're all gone now because they were all either bought up or disappeared. And he finds this in the steel industry, he finds it in penicillin, he finds it in tires, he finds industry after industry in the same pattern of life cycle. So what's the implication? You know, the startups, the entrepreneurs, when they start the company, I mean, Henry Ford was an entrepreneur, right? He was there on the way on the left, and then he actually has a great idea, kind of rides that wave up, and in the end, it ends up being one of the handful of companies in the industry. So he goes from being an entrepreneur to a dominant firm. Well, we know from a very different literature, a very important idea, the theory of economic evolution, that says the ability of the company to appropriate, that is to get the benefits from its own investment in knowledge, it evolves over the life cycle as it goes from being entrepreneurial to be dominant, to large and dominant. It actually gets more difficult. Now, Nelson Winter two great thinkers. They influenced me a lot. They characterize, again, the early stage of that picture, it's the entrepreneurial regime. It's about coming up with something new. But once you do, and it's hard to figure out what's the good idea, what's not the good idea, you're always picking where you spend a lot of money, it makes more sense to try to protect what you've got, protect the status quo, rather than to try to innovate, because you're not very good at it. Which then leads to a third idea that's important. Really, you've got macros and economists at the University of Maryland, the Nobel Prize, and it's the theory of rent seeking. And it says, you know, given that a company could invest a certain amount of money, say $1 million, if it's really dominant and large, it's not likely to, it can create new knowledge, but it can't figure out what's the good idea, what's not the good idea, and it's likely to do the wrong thing. Better use the money to try to preserve the status quo, that is, try to preserve those economic rents, those high profits. And how you do that, you try to push the competition away, you try to keep the rules to preempt any kinds of competition. So what does that mean is that in a place when there's dominant interest, it's not so clear that everybody's welcoming and embracing entrepreneurs. So we see that today. You don't need this picture to know, you know, those great entrepreneurs when I was in your seats as a student, the Bill Gates and Microsoft and the, you know, Steve Jobs at Apple and the Zuckerbergs at Facebook. You know, that was back, well, way before even picture. That was back in the 1980s, and, you know, a year later. But we see what happens. These are just some of the products. And you can see those companies dominate most of the markets. Now, what does that mean? An entrepreneur, Patrick Spence, he was the founder of Sonos. Sonos makes smart speakers. And he testified at Congress back in January, and he said that these legacy corporations, they're trying to drive out competitors like his company. And in particular, he said, and if you go down to the quote, he said, venture capital firms, because that's what entrepreneurs need. I mean, they need finance, so they get it from venture capital, you might as well say, or angel capital, or anybody else, the famous 3Fs, family, friends, and fools. But they know if they give this money to a startup that's in the kill zone, is what they call it. What's that mean? The dominant firms knows, we don't want this firm in the kill zone because this is where it becomes a threat. And so nobody will invest in the firm. So that this becomes a challenge to entrepreneurship, to the entrepreneurship ecosystem. It's one thing to say, yeah, we're trying to encourage entrepreneurs, but we've got this problem. So what's a place to do? And here there's some insights. And one insight is from one of the great thinkers in economics, Albert O. Hirschman. I heard him talk in Berlin. It was right after the wall went down, and he came and talked about his great book. And he really irritated me because I spent a lot of effort and time learning German. I'm really proud. I think I said my sentence earlier, right? I can repeat it if you want. And then this guy marches in from, I don't know, Harvard, and he gives a whole lecture in German. And his German was perfect. I mean, a lot of the technical words he had to say in English. And, you know, as he's telling the story, he says, oh yeah, he actually grew up in Berlin. And his family was Jewish. And at some point in the mid-1930s, they realized they better get out. And so they exit. He said some relatives, so they didn't have any voice. You can kind of see where this is going, because they were Jewish. And so his family exits. Other relatives were loyal to the status quo. He doesn't explain well why, but that's the way people are. Some are this way, some are this way. And they all perish in the concentration camps. And yeah, so I went out and bought that book. I thought, wow, this is really important. What I found, it's actually a primer on how Pepsi can create brand loyalty through advertising. so customers don't exit to Coke. And wow. But actually, it's a useful way of thinking about if entrepreneurs and other people have enough, you could say loyalty, if they're passionate, if they love their place, they're going to stay in that place. They're not going to leave just because maybe they could do something a little bit better, and they could make more money, or whatever, someplace else, maybe it's a little warmer. If they're connected to that place. You know, we heard from exactly such an entrepreneur the other day. Oh, yeah, sure. Diane Hendricks, right? Who is still here. She's, I think, the #1 on the Forbes billionaire list of female entrepreneurs who've made their own money rather than some other inherited or something like that. And it's very clear. She's got, I wouldn't say loyalty, she loves this place. She's invested in it. Her entrepreneurship has been devoted to lifting Beloit up. You know, kind of a different view of this is from a colleague, a friend of mine, Al Link at the University of North Carolina, and he wrote a book on how is it that North Carolina went from the second poorest state in the country. It was a state making it was based on three things: cigarettes, small scale farms, and almost kind of clothes production at home. I mean, no capital, no productivity, and it was poor, impoverished. Now, of course, the way most of us think about it, especially this research triangle region, it's prosperous, wealthy, tech. How did this happen? And the answer is in Al's, the title of this book, A Generosity Spirit. Now, when I picked up the book, he's an economist, so I thought, okay, I'll see some data and some tables, and then I'll see some equations, and then I'll see some analysis. No. The first page is actually a photo of 5 men taken way back, kind of black and white. And these are the leaders of North Carolina, the governor, a couple of business people, maybe presidents of a couple of universities. They get together, and they're tired of losing the best. And they're tired of their children going to New York and Chicago and Philadelphia and any place but there. Right? They wanted to get out. And they wanted to give their kids a reason to stay home. So that for them, rather than just retire and go to Florida, they put their energy and effort, make this a place with a future. And they put their heads together and thought, what do we have? We have these great universities. We're going to get them together. It's going to form this triangle. And we're going to promote entrepreneurship. A generation later, you could see it actually worked. But it took this generosity of spirit. Now, why did they do this? Because they love their place. Having this passion, this connection to place, that doesn't just happen. I can feel it here at this college. I mean, sure, not everybody loves a strong word, but a lot of you feel a connection. You've got a beautiful community that you can feel out into the greater community. That's not a given at all. Or there's the example in Bilbao. Bilbao's in the Basque Country. And I went there for the first time in 1980, right after I moved to Europe. Maybe 86, 87. And it was down in that place. They weren't making automobiles or motor vehicles like up in Janesville or Detroit. They were making ships. But like for the automobiles, it was cheaper, less expensive to make the ships in Korea and other places in Asia. They were no longer competitive. And so jobs were just hemorrhaging, unemployment was massive, and then you get this social decay. They told me at the hotel, don't go out after dark. I mean, Europe's safe, especially back then, but not in Bilbao. Well, some of the leaders, I mean, they love their place. We know why. They have a different culture. It's this Basque thing. They have a different language. It's this Basque thing. They don't think that they're Spanish, whatever. But they fight for their place. And they fought for their place. So strangely enough, what they did was to get the first Guggenheim located located outside of North America, get it located there. And you know what? This actually then started to attract the tourists. The tourists discovered the culinary scene, the Rioja. The designers came and they transformed it into an entrepreneurial hub. You know, then we get, and I'll finish up, Laura. Every summer I take a group of students to the hills of Baden-Württemberg and Bavaria, up in the north of Italy, to visit the famous Mittelstand companies, the small companies. And here we're visiting a glass company. It's just in the middle of no place in rural Baden-Württemberg. It doesn't matter, but it's in Gershofen, it's Roschmann, and they make glass. But they make special glass that's curved. And one thing we learned, don't try this at home, take glass and curved, right? And the CEO was telling the family guy, it's a small company, and they put their glass in the Eiffel Tower, and they put it in museums in the U.S., and they put it in, and they just got a big contract from the Smithsonian. And one of the students said, what about Buy America First? And the CEO, family guy, says, yeah, I worried about that too. And I asked the Smithsonian, why are you buying from us? And the head of the Smithsonian said, well, of course, we look for an American company. They don't exist. They only make mass-produced flat glass. And that you can make inexpensively, large scale. They don't make it in the U.S. anyway. They've outsourced and offshored it. So this small rural company, it uses skilled workers. These people are middle-class life, and it's entrepreneurship for a place. Now, one of the students asked me, why can't we do this back home in southern Indiana? It doesn't look like rocket science. It's not rocket science. And what he knows is that, we've got a problem, not just in southern Indiana, really all throughout the country, but especially in rural regions. Opioids. There's people there. They don't want to leave their homes. They love their homes. The problem is they have no prospects. What's probably failing, interesting enough, is entrepreneurship, who can figure out how to utilize these resources, these people, put them into a productive way, as we saw there in Baden-Württemberg and other cases. So entrepreneurship for a place requires a social entrepreneur. Maybe not her, but maybe somebody like Diane Hendricks, who feels so committed, attached to the place. They're going to be an entrepreneur for the place to make the place do better. So, in conclusion, let me reflect in my remaining 2 minutes. Let me reflect on the great man, Joseph Schumpeter. And everybody knows Schumpeter celebrated entrepreneurship as the catalyst for creative destruction. I mean, we all know, right? The Henry Ford, his automobile, it destroyed the horse and buggy, right? We know Steve Jobs, his personal computer, it destroyed the typewriter, my beloved typewriter I did my PhD on up in Madison. That's what entrepreneurship is. But when I think about Janesville, the last decades, that destruction, or I think about Detroit or Gary, Indiana, a lot of places, that destruction didn't come from an entrepreneur. That came from, you could say globalization, you could say it came from a shock, but it happened externally. People like Diane Hendricks, they're not destroying anything from their entrepreneurship. It's actually not creative destruction. You could call it creative construction. I mean, I'm not here to kind of say the great man was wrong, but I think it's more to the picture that creative destruction, I think, is more about a place for entrepreneurship. It is when the entrepreneur gets something from a place and then goes at it. But the other kind of entrepreneur is really motivated. How can I make my place? How can I solve problems? How can I, in that sense, it's creative construction. So we get this dichotomy, is it, which is it? Is it a place for entrepreneurship or entrepreneurship for a place? I guess the answer to that question I learned the last time I left Wisconsin, because I drove right away to my new job in Vermont. And about this time of year, the snow would start falling, and we'd go cross-country skiing up in the Green Mountains, and the trail would invariably take us by the Robert Frost house, the house where the great man, the great poet, laureate had lived for much of his life. And it was in that very house he wrote one of his most famous poems, which ended with, "The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep." So, what he means by that is, what are the woods? Well, the woods may be lovely, dark, deep, and alluring, but they're a distraction. They're a distraction from the promise. What's the promise? That's in each person. It's their authenticity. It's their authentic path, so that their own inner spark can thrive. So, which is it? It makes a difference, that's for sure. I would tell the young people, one thing for sure is that it makes a difference, and you all have miles to go before you sleep. Thank you very much.
We have time for some questions here. Anyone want to get us started this evening?
Hi, thank you so much for just giving your presentation. I was wondering, you mentioned that he was a great entrepreneur. As I know, he fuels a lot of money into the Beloit community. I was just curious as to what defines an innovator and putting money into innovation versus actually being an entrepreneur and creating innovation.
Yeah, our young lady prepared to spend the next 4 years with me. Because, right, Siri, we spend our profession exactly with this question. I mean, they're both important, innovation, and, in some ways, in entrepreneurship. And we know that in innovation, we're pretty clear on it's something new, but that becomes successfully introduced. Some people say in the market, I'd probably say in society. Now that's hedging, because you've got the word new, then you've got the word successful. And so at what point do you say, yeah, I sold 3 of these, that doesn't make it right. In fact, most things fail in life. That's in Klepper's curves in some ways. So the point of it, that's innovation. Now, but notice that's not a person. A person is somebody who actually creates something new and then introduces it into society. Typically, we think they're going to do it through a new company, although they can do it in existing companies, existing organizations, and it kind of depends on your perspective. But one thing we know for sure, the innovation is the thing, or it could be a service. But the entrepreneur, one thing we know, it's always a person or a group of people. So the two are connected. Now you got me going. You'll regret the question. Can you have an entrepreneur that doesn't innovate? Certainly the entrepreneur is trying to innovate. My answer is sure. Some innovations are more successful, they're bigger. It's kind of a matter of debate. Can you have an innovation without an entrepreneur? I don't know if a tree falls in the woods, nobody's there. Thanks for the question.
Okay, we're going to try a different mic here. Do we have any other questions?
Hello, I'm Nolan Wright. I'm a business economics major, senior from Carmel, Indiana. I'm sure you're aware of it. So I know you touched on it here at the end of your presentation, but given your extensive research on regional economic growth, how do you think these smaller cities in these rural areas can effectively foster entrepreneurship without the same concentration of resources or talent as major innovation hubs?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. And I think we learned that from going to places like Germany, where we see these small communities, and they're thriving. It's, you know, it's not really, the Mittelstand is a small company. It's family owned. It tends to have a niche and a high market share. If it's high enough, we call it hidden champion. But the thing is, everybody, you know, somebody once said it takes a village to raise a child. Maybe, but it seems to take a village to generate a successful Mittelstand company, or better yet, a cluster of them. Everybody chips in the way they can, and everybody benefits. We see that a lot. There's a lot of talk in this country, there's been for a long time in other countries, oh yeah, we need that too. Because you can suddenly give people a reason that they feel like they have no choice but to go to Chicago or, you know, Indianapolis, hopefully they won't find Carmel up there, or to, you know, Philadelphia or wherever. But they can stay home and they can have a good life. And so the key thing is workers have to be skilled. That's the famous apprentice system. But I think what we get wrong, we think, oh, okay, we'll create apprentices without realizing it's a team sport. I believe that your football team back there in the Hoosier State, the Colts, I think that they thought, oh, they could turn it around if they drafted a great quarterback, which they did. And guess what? They're finding out this season. It doesn't work. You know why it doesn't work? It's a team sport. There's also other positions. Well, actually, this Mittelstand, it's a way it's a bad, okay, it puts the focus on the company, which is important, but actually you need the supporting community. I have time to go through it. Read my book.
Great question.
Hi, I'm also a senior studying business economics. First, thank you for your presentation, and I want to ask a question, going back to your example on Germany and Bilbao, how entrepreneurship really kind of released the potential for these cities. My question is, how does entrepreneurship also affect the smaller politics of these cities and regions? Does it affect like smaller elections or just polls and ballots or anything of that sort in your experience?
You know what? It's a great question. I don't think we know the answer to that question. In some ways, when I was in your seats, a little touch older, and went up the street there in Madison, you know, I told you, we didn't learn anything about entrepreneurship. We didn't learn about small business. We didn't learn about startups. I was in that part of economics that has a focus on industry and markets. The whole focus was on the General Motors, the Fords, this is where the action was. So my kind of, I don't know if it's apologetic, I see it as encouraging, you know, because you're right, the key thing, but one of the key, I mean, there's a lot of key elements. Why is something, and this is why people come from the outside, wow, boy, you guys have something here. Now, you could say you were lucky because you keep having to look up this woman's name. Don't get old. Diane Hendricks, you know, she's here and she is connected. And as one of the previous speakers said, she will put her, you know, money where her mouth is, where her allegiance is. And that's a rare thing. I mean, it's also true, it's not, as you know, it's not really just a coincidence I mean, she tried to love Beloit, Gainesville, but they rejected her. So, you know, you're second best. But it's probably not totally a coincidence that there was something here that people look at the idea and heard. They said, okay, we're going to bet on you. And they did. And then there they said, no, you can't do that here. But you're right, because you've got in the book everything in its place, the strategic management of cities and regions and states. I really hedge on who does the strategic management of the place. And the answer is it can vary. It's not governments necessarily. It's not necessarily business. It's not necessarily nonprofit, but it's not citizens necessarily. It can be any of those in a combination. But as I was kind of giving examples, it can also be blocked and impeded probably by any one of those groups. So at that point, the politics really makes all the difference. And I guess what I'm saying is I haven't seen research linking those two things together. So I don't want to give you the advice to continue your studies, get a PhD, and become one of us, because then I sound too much like the invasion of the body snatchers. I could make you don't want to do that, but it's really a great question, and it really makes a difference. It does say governance, politics makes a big difference. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, interesting question. Any other? Okay. Let's see, could we? Hi, my name is Elena Nasser. I'm a senior majoring in international political economics. I was wondering, we've heard a few times this week, both in your talk, how you mentioned with, I believe it was North Carolina, and then in Oakley Ryan's speech, how she talked about the revitalization of Janesville and how that kind of started in sort of a similar, gathering of private citizens. But in your framework, you have this, obviously policy playing such a huge role. So, I'm sure it's some combination, but as far as, really electrifying a place and making it that dynamic and that staying power, do you think that it has to come from a public or a private, and which is a bigger catalyst?
I think, I wouldn't want to say which is more important. I think it depends on it's the context. That's a vague word. But this is going to be different. I know when you think of the National Football League, you ask, what's more important, offense, defense, or special teams? The real knowledgeable people say, they're all important, right? And you kind of want them to work together. So there's great, the Bill Bell example, that was not the government. That was, I kind of went through it fast. That was actually civic leaders, people who loved their place. They clearly had to work with, not to put clear what degree they were working with the shipbuilding industry, but they were, you've got to kind of get this coalition of the willing. But you're right to say, who starts it? I know in my very own Indiana, central Indiana, where some people are from, right? It used to be a pretty down and out place. The older people in the room remember, they used to call Indiana no place, or Indianapolis, Indiana no place, right? And it was called a lot of things, a lot of negative things. And really, when I got there about 1997, 98, the great corporation in central Indiana, the Lilly Pharmaceutical Company, they realized they had a problem for innovation competitive, because most companies in their strategy, they need to be in a cluster where there's a lot of biotech companies coming up with new inventions. They get the inventions and then they turn them into innovations, to go back to you and get them out. And it's a big process. The trouble with Lilly, it's isolated. And they look to San Diego, where they've got a cluster. They look to this research triangle, that's where the biotech companies, the pharmaceutical, and so they're starting to think about, maybe we should move to San Diego, the research triangle. That's when I moved to Bloomington. I started to read about this and hear about it. And what they decided instead is, I guess they decided that's too expensive. Whether it was that, whether it was the loyalty, I mean, in the sense of a lot of reasons, a lot of employees are connected to this. They said, no, we're gonna fight for this. So they basically championed the creation of what they needed, which is a biotech life science ecosystem, a cluster in central Indiana. And they couldn't do it alone. So they actually work with nonprofits, the famous Lilly Foundation. It's not the company, but they said how the Lilly Foundation starts prioritizing. The university, the medical school needs to prioritize hiring people in life sciences by exactly what biotech companies need. They start to work with the government to create kind of infrastructure for easy mobility. So, but the whole thing, I believe, my sense is, it was championed by a legacy existing company in there, and then the other players kind of fell into place. You know, once again, to go back to, maybe if you didn't like the last PhD idea, you can try this one. It'll be interesting to go to different places and then categorize. Was the leader, the champion, you know, or did it come from the government? Did it come from the private sector? It came from the private sector. Was it a kind of a leading dominant firm like Lilly? Did it come from the academic? I've heard University of Akron, I think somebody said Akron, right? See it? I thought you were seeing it.
I am.
Yeah. And I think that I heard the president of the University of Akron, I believe, talk some years ago and say, you know, things are getting pretty tough there. And it was heard in the university. So that they took the mission of revitalizing the area around it for the, you know, they championed this. So you can see that leadership is a function in a way. It's a function. The actual, I'll say actor doing that can vary. That's something that kind of, I don't know, it kind of makes me crazy when people say, oh, you need venture capital. Well, that's what they have in venture in Silicon Valley in this country. But if you go to Sweden, at least it used to be, they don't have a lot of venture capital. So there you see other kinds of actors providing that early stage finance. What matters is the function, not necessarily the actor.
Thank you, David. So in senior seminar, we did read a case study of New York City after the financial crisis, and it really focused on the New York City Economic Development Corporation, the work that they did. So I think all sorts of different examples of coalitions, but I do want to mention Brian Morello gave us such an excellent tour of Beloit just yesterday morning. It feels like it was, a week ago now.
It does.
But what I appreciated about Brian's tour is that Diane Hendricks has certainly done amazing things to revitalize the city of Beloit. And there were also other actors that were involved in that project that are maybe less visible at this moment. So, Brian was talking about the redevelopment of the riverfront. I know there's Emeritus Professor Adams in the audience right now who actually kind of brought in the landscape architect to draw up the plan for that project. And it was exactly a situation that you just described of a university, Beloit College, right? Located in a city, and this idea that Beloit College needs the city of Beloit also needs Beloit College. So how can we possibly work together and make our shared community a better place? Okay, so I know there's another hand down here, so I'm gonna pass this down the line.
Hi, David. I was wondering what the resolution was to the Stockholm paradox, or is the jury still out on that? Because I can think of no shortage of places just in America that have tons of ingenuity, but it just doesn't translate in some way. So, yeah, was there ever a resolution to that?
That's my favorite question of all, because, and I think that some of you at least have studied it. The resolution is knowledge spillover entrepreneurship. It says that knowledge isn't going to commercialize itself. So now, it doesn't mean it has to be entrepreneurship, but in a way, it's almost like the entrepreneur is the commercializer of last resort. And of course, it's not always going to be, I mean, there's all kinds of ideas out there that aren't being commercialized. That's what's interesting about ideas. It's not so trivial to separate the good one from the, so the resolution is that knowledge, so said, oh, it's luck, right? It falls like manna from heaven. Romer said, oh no, if it's created, then it just kind of becomes available to everybody in the region. It's like it rains down, almost like the way the dandelions just blow over for your neighbors in the spring. Well, the third view says somebody's got to take that knowledge and they've got to sweat blood, sweat, and tears and take it out in the market. Now, it doesn't have to be an entrepreneur. Mostly, it's probably not. It's the company itself. So the resolution says there's a missing link, and the missing link is the commercialization, which lots of times, you said the word translation, that's a key thing. Because it's one thing to have the knowledge, which is ideas, but that's a pretty far away from something that's useful to society. Remember back in the COVID, back with COVID, and most of us got this vaccination. I said thank you to the person putting it in our arm. Well, we never got the thing. At the other end of the chain, the chemists and the biologists doing basic research, knowledge for its own sake. But they had a lot of insights and ideas that then when we realized, we have a problem, COVID, we started throwing money, get us a solution. The starting place was this basic research, but that's far away from a vaccination. So then when they start doing applied research, they said, okay, we're going to do research to come up with a solution, come up with a vaccination. And remember some of the first, we read about this or hear about it. They thought vaccinations basically would make your ears fall off or you grow horns or something like that. So that wasn't good. Again, they kind of think they have vaccinations, but they have to go through clinical testing to make sure it won't hurt you. Finally, they kind of get through that, and they have to actually manufacture the thing. And that's no easy feat either, right? Notice there's this vertical chain. Then they have to ship it. Remember there was a problem about the refrigeration? It's a challenge. So you're kind of translated all the way from the idea, very vague distance, to something now closer and closer and closer and closer and closer. And then you have to kind of instruct the professionals, what to do, how to do this. In the end, somebody puts a needle on our arm, we say thank you. Well, that's what they call the linear model of innovation, which you start with an idea, and if you're lucky, you get an invention, and then a prototype of something new. You develop it, and if you're lucky, it's the word innovation, you successfully introduce it to the market, and then if you're even luckier, it diffuses broadly, as we see, say, for the smartphone or the laptop, and for the COVID vaccination. But the point is, just because you have the knowledge doesn't mean, you go right to the usefulness, the commercialization. It's got to be translated, and I think that's where that's the most interesting place. How do you kind of make these linkages from one step to the other, to the other, to the other? And probably most of you in the room, the students, this is where you're going to be working at, because that's actually where a lot of the important work is. How do you figure out which ideas are valuable, and then you select and where they're going to solve problems in society in a way that makes a contribution. So the resolution of the paradox was simply that knowledge doesn't automatically spill over. Somebody's got to take that and get it out there, and that occurs. That's what entrepreneurs do. That's a great question.
I think in the Sweden example, we can think about the reforms that happened in the 1990s as well. Lots to talk about these case studies. So we are at 8:30. I would like to encourage everyone to join me in giving David Audretsch another round of applause.